Hello, everyone. Welcome to Midweek Gaming. I'm Nick. Over on the other side of the mic is, of course, Justin, providing audio, gameplay, and the usual commentary wherever applicable. So, interesting week. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. To anyone who's watching this the night it comes out, probably.
Yes.
We
You
are
are not
both forever
alone.
alone, however.
You are not alone. Do not worry.
Yeah, you have us, so you're not alone.
We are here.
Let us all be alone together. Therefore, we are not alone. But anyways,
Brother.
yeah. There you go. My depression aside. Anyways, so yeah, bit of interesting, well, not interesting this week. Been a bit slow as far as I can see this week, but there's probably something going on I'm not aware of. But this actually gives me an interesting opportunity to talk about the thing I've been wanting to talk about the last 2 odd weeks now, and that is movie tie-in games. I've been wanting to talk about this for a little bit now, considering I this was a spur of. Let me just give you the backstory to this one, right? It was a spur of a moment kind of thing. I was literally sitting on my couch one night, flipping through my YouTube on my smart TV, and because everyone has a smart TV nowadays, probably not even wrong considering it's an industry standard. But anyway, so I'm flipping through YouTube on the TV, right? And I'm watching a video, and between ad breaks, I see a commercial come up, and I don't care enough to flip it off, so I let it run for a little bit, and I'm like, wait a minute, what is this? And I see this ended up being Indiana Jones, and I knew there was a movie coming out. So for the briefest second, I'm like, wait, this might be for the movie, but I'm like, wait, no, those are game graphics. And I'm like, oh wow, there's an Indiana Jones game coming out that I didn't even know about. And then this got me thinking, considering the new Indiana Jones movie, I think hit DVD recently, like a few weeks back, something like that.
How about?
So I got thinking about movie tie-in games because obviously when a new movie comes out, either in theaters or on disc, generally there's a game associated with it to capitalize on it. At least that's sometimes what ends up happening. So I got thinking about movie tie-in games and how they've changed quite drastically over the years. In fact, nowadays I wouldn't even call them games that come out alongside movies movie tie-in games, right? Because technically when you think of movie tie-in, like what do you think when you think movie tie-in game, Justin? Just elaborate to the audience. What is your first impression?
Um, Pretty much a game that, or yeah, well, pretty much a movie or game that kind of either expands or involves the a story of the other.
Exactly. Like you'd think of a movie tie-in game as something that either is the video gameized, for lack of a better term, version of the story, or a game that happens to take place alongside the story, just in parallel, perhaps. But here's the thing: movie games these days, or games that take place in movies these days, or movie worlds, franchises. I don't know. Movie tie-in games these days aren't exactly tie-in games anymore. Like we were actually just discussing this before the stream. The closest thing you have to a movie tie-in game these days is the game takes place in the same franchise, in the same world. And this kind of is going back to how this all kind of started with me seeing this trailer and me having only recently gotten my hands on, recently being a few weeks back, the new Avatar game for, well, I got it for Series X. Really good, actually. It's definitely the Far Cry version of Avatar that everyone thought it would be, but that's not actually a bad thing. It's actually really good. Ubisoft did really well on this one.
Hmm.
But, it got me thinking, like I said, because that made me think of the last game that came out for Avatar. And that was literally called Avatar the Game. And that's another thing. You don't really see that much anymore when it comes to, like, games. Like, you always knew that it was a movie tie in game because it was literally called Da 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 the Game. Like, going back to the Avatar games, there were two technically that came out. There was, well, two versions technically. There were three different games that came out on the different platforms of the time, which was Nintendo DS and Xbox 360 and PlayStation, I think. Yes, but there were two different versions depending on which of the two console types you got, either the handheld or the like mainline consoles. The mainline console one was actually a parallel story that took place alongside the movie, kind of like what we were talking about with what you brought up earlier as well, Justin. Kind of the idea of a game that runs parallel to the movie storyline.
Hmm.
The DS version, however, as far as I didn't really think too much about it at the time, but when I was playing the Avatar game, I actually did some research into that other game, and I learned that it's actually technically a prequel to the movie. So again, it's in that same vein. But, it was still called the game back then. But you don't really see that anymore. You don't really see any game you don't see any movie or video games that are associated with movie franchises called the game anymore, which is kind of funny. Though it makes sense. It's like someone buys like the Xbox 360 version of the Avatar game. I can just see the marketing department right now being like, wait, guys, remember to put the game on the box, just in case. We don't want anyone putting the game into their DVD player, hoping to watch Avatar or something. Like, I guess they thought everyone would just confuse the game and the movie. I don't freaking know. But like I said, you don't really see that much anymore. And so you kind of see this massive departure to not only that phrase, but also how video game tie-in movies are these days. Like, you don't, to my knowledge, see any movie or game tie-ins these days that take place alongside the movie's story, at least to my knowledge. Like, another instance we can think of is the Star Wars games.
Right.
The Star Wars game will come out, right? But they won't take place, like, outside of taking place in the universe of Star Wars. That is the only connection. They don't have to do with the movie, generally speaking. Same thing with the Avatar game. Technically, it takes place in the same franchise, same thing, but it doesn't really have much to do with the movie outside of some references here and there to possibly stuff that is happening at the same time, but it's not really a factor. It's very distant, very distant. So you don't see many original types of tie-in games anymore. I think movie tie-in games themselves are kind of going by the wayside, and to bring this whole kind of rant of mine to back to where I started, movie tie-in games don't really feel like you could call them movie tie-in games anymore. They're just video games that are in the world of the movie nowadays, or franchise these days. Because let's be honest, it's never just movies these days. There's comic books, there's this, there's that, there's toy merchandise, But I'm getting off topic. My point is that video game tie-ins aren't exactly a thing anymore. And so it's kind of interesting to see all of this. I don't know. That's just my little.
There's a lot to it and all that.
Yeah, a lot to it in a way. It's interesting to just see how. Like, another interesting point I can bring up here is, like, just take Dune for example, right? Like, Dune Part 2 is coming out. I literally just saw a trailer to that as I'm sitting here just before our show started. I was again flipping through YouTube on my smart TV. I get a lot of things through YouTube on my smart TV. Don't get any ideas, Google. But because let's be honest, Google hears everything you say online. But again, I once again see a trailer, but this time for the movie Part 2 of Dune. And that gets me thinking, oh wait, there was a Dune game that came out, I think, when the first part of the movies came out, Part 1, on Steam, and it was an RTS game. I think it did relatively well. I don't know.
Hard to tell for sure.
Hard to tell for sure. I'd have to go. Actually, I'm curious, since I have Steam pulled up right in front of me. Let's just figure it out. Let me just live reaction to to me figuring out how the game did. Spice Wars. Oh, there's 2 games now. Yeah, no, the RTS did pretty well, mostly positive. Recently is very positive, so there you go. What about the other Dune game I just saw? Imperium, or I think it's called. This one's from 2023. It looks like a card-based game. Overwhelmingly positive, so there you go. So, well, the closest we have today is when it comes to movie tie-in games is that they have, you know, characters from the movies appear in the game, or it's just kind of like for the backdrop of the game. But aside from that, we don't really have like legitimate like OG movie tie-in games anymore. Where it's like, again, going back to my previous point, Avatar the game, it takes parallel to the story, right?
Yeah.
Like, it feels that games and movies, despite being in the same franchise or same universe if they take place together, are divorced from each other these days. And like I said, you don't see
They
the game being put in
they
anything these
they're
days.
either their own contained universe or something different entirely.
Yeah, they're their own story plot, or they've like only casual references to the broader things going on. So it's just interesting to see that. Again, just my entire rant I wanted to do for this video
Hmm.
because I found that to be a very interesting rabbit hole to go down. What about you, Justin? What are your thoughts on movie tie-in games and where they currently stand, or
A
games in
lot
general?
of the time, I'll say this. A lot of the time, a lot of people who've made a game adaptation or a movie adaptation tend to lose a lot of specific substance, and that is kind of to be expected for the most part, especially with books that go down the movie or TV show route, like making a version of it and all that. It's to be expected, but as of lately, it's been very, very apparent where it kind of clearly shows that for the most part, a lot of people making these games and whatnot are kind of just freely, willingly throwing a lot of stuff to the side that made what they're trying to make an adaptation to what it was. Like things like a video
Instant.
game. What?
I think you're going a very specific route here, but I'll
No,
let
no.
you.
I was gonna refer to two things actually, but like
Mm.
things like for um. Okay, don't mind me as I sit here confused. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
like things like Star Wars and Halo, you've got like core fundamental things that have kind of been like a case, like a major point within the franchise for the longest of time, and new adaptations and new things come out for it, and a lot of that gets thrown to the side. So it's kind of weird that's becoming more and more common now within the industry, where a lot of very fundamental things that make the series what it was, like you've got the Harry Potter series, a lot of things in the books, which is the original material, isn't in any of the games or the movies or anything like that. A lot of things like The Witcher and all that, a lot of stuff from that, the game series and everything, isn't stuff that you find in the books. Like the books has more details and stuff. Like it's an apparent thing that happens no matter what. But like I said, it's happening more and more, and people are changing entire aspects of the story from what it was to what they want it to be. Things like simple things like characters or entire plot of elements and stuff, story, how it's supposed to go or how originally goes. It's very weird to see that like a lot of more elements than normal, instead of just being lost in the adaptation, or outright more often being just removed and ignored.
That's the thing, right? And that's kind of an interesting point to raise, right? On the topic, while we're on the topic of adaptations, while we used to see movies get adapted into games, now we're seeing almost the opposite happen in the industry. We're seeing games get adapted into movies and TV shows, which,
Yeah.
again, by itself isn't a bad thing.
No.
As you were saying, Justin, like books originally got see, it's weird. We're seeing this almost like evolution of adaptations. First, books became movies, then movies became games, then games are becoming movies again. It's a full freaking circle. But
Now all
we're
we need to
seeing that,
wait is
right?
for the books to be made.
Yeah, now we need to be wait for the games to become books. But anyways, actually no, we're already past that point, I think. But
Mhm.
anyways, but but it's one of those things, right? Where I was literally another thing I was actually watching for the series is actually a bit of inconsistencies between um the Lord of the Rings books and the movies. One of the very specific things actually being asked is why didn't Bilbo get sensed by Sauron when he wore the One Ring in the first, like in the Hobbit series, but Frodo did later on in the actual movies. for the second half of the Lord of the Rings series?
Right.
And the answer effectively is, well, he didn't, because in the books, actually, Frodo didn't either. For a very long time in the books, Frodo actually didn't get sensed by Sauron. The whole eye thing you see when he's in the tavern at Bree, yeah, that don't happen actually in the books at all. He just vanishes, and the only reason the Nazgul find him is because word gets back to the Nazgul through spies that something very similar to what the ring can do happened to a guy in Bree, and they just kind of get tipped off. In the
Hmm.
books, the most you get is that there is alludings to the fact that those who are connected to the ring, such as the Nazgul, such as Sauron, such as Golem, feel the vague pull of the ring, and they can kind of tell maybe the general location, but they can't be like, you have it, and like
Right.
stare
It's
across the world
it's
at
not
you.
like in the movies where it's like I know exactly where you are the moment you put on the ring.
Right. There's like one instance in the books where he actually does get sensed by Sauron, and that is when he's basically sitting in a chair that allows him to see across Middle Earth all the way to Mordor while he's wearing the ring at the time, oddly enough. And then Sauron turns and is like, I see you. So, it's not as it's in the book. So there are points in movies that get changed from the books and vice versa, right? There are some details that get changed here and there, but we're seeing with certain adaptations nowadays, like I'll just say it, the Halo TV series,
Hmm.
which completely scraps the like. I'm not gonna hold punches here, friends. So if you like the Halo TV series, I'm sorry. I just gotta say it like it is. Or they just throw certain parts of the story out the window. Now, I'm not going to say that's a necessarily bad idea in and of itself. That can work to soft reboot it in a different context, right? But at a certain point, you have to question if you're losing the original plot,
Right.
right?
See,
Like,
I'll make this point real quick. There are times where people have made adaptations that kind of act like their own separate universe. And the Halo series there is kind of meant to be its own timeline type of thing. But there comes a point where you're taking so many elements from the original timeline, people begin to question whether or not this new apparent timeline is an actual new timeline or is it just you trying to rewrite the original timeline.
right. That's kind of an interesting point to raise going back to the Middle Earth thing, right? There have been, oddly enough as well, many tie in games to The Lord of the Rings in gaming form. There's actually been, well, just series I can think of. There's technically three I can think of if you count two of the games being as part of one franchise, and that's the Shadow of War series or Shadow of series if you're counting them. I played both of them, they're really good actually.
Mm.
But one of the things, oddly enough, that irks people of the Shadow series is that they actually rewrite Celebrimbor's character. For those who aren't familiar with Lord of the Rings, which I'm not surprised if you're not, it's quite an extensive lore to get involved in. Basically, this character is the one who creates the titular rings that effectively create the Nazgul and yada yada yada. Now, he doesn't create the One Ring, mind you. That was Sauron's making. But it's played off in the books that what effectively happens is he creates the rings, which create the Nazgul, again unaware of what they can actually do. Once he's aware, he creates three more rings for the elves. Sauron gets pissed because he can't control them, so he turns around and kills Celebrimbor. To very much oversimplify things. So sorry to the Lord of the Rings fans who are sitting here and having an aneurysm with my explanation. I'm sorry. For the sake of time, I can't go into the full edit. But effectively, that's where Celebrimbor's story effectively begins and ends. He creates the seven rings, effectively, if I'm remembering my numbers right. Might be nine, actually, but the point being. He creates the rings that corrupt people, again, unknowingly, and then realizing it to effectively counter them, he creates three more pure rings, which given to the elves, which that effectively pisses off Sauron and gets him killed. In the Shadow series, however, it's played off a bit differently. Now, I don't remember if the Elven rings are mentioned in the Shadow games, but it does effectively follow the same general path. Celebrimbor creates the seven rings, or some rings, I can't remember, under Sauron's guidance, again under disguise, because he doesn't know who he's making them for at the time, or who he's really making them at the behest of. But then, what ends up getting some people pissed off is that the game diverges somewhat and says that Sauron then kidnaps him and his family after he creates the One Ring and he realizes what's happening, drags Celebrimbor to Mount Doom and effectively forces him to perfect the One Ring. And this starts a whole plot of Celebrimbor stealing the ring and yada yada yada. But that's what irks middle Tolkien fans is because technically That neither makes sense nor is it what happens. Like, why would Sauron, who created the rings and taught Celebrimbor how to make the rings, need Celebrimbor to perfect the Master Ring? Why would he have his student do something that he taught him?
Right.
And again, in the movies and the books, this is actually what ends up happening: is that Sauron makes and perfects it all on his own. But again, the game diverges for the sake of plot. But again, it's one of those cases where it's like, depending on how sensitive you are on the lore, it's egregious or it's not. But anyways, point being is that we see this kind of thing where there are times where the plot gets thrown out, but depending on how much you throw it out, like it could be small details, it could be large details, but so long as the general flow is there, most people are willing to live and let live. But when you throw out the entire narrative to some degree and reboot it to the point where, again, take the Halo season 1, not sure what happened in season 2, you start to wonder, do you even know what the heck you're telling at this point? Like, one thing is, let's do it for narrative reasons for the sake of creating a story, because in some cases it makes sense why you have to change up the narrative somewhat, because otherwise the said game or thing you're trying to make just wouldn't exist within the narrative. Some are just so well written that there's really no loopholes to work with. So you kind of have to. That's understandable. But in the case of, like I said, the Halo series, you have a very vast timeline to work with. There's many sections in the timeline of Halo that are just blank. Like, there's an entire section. Hell, you could even do an entire Halo prequel series just based around the Forerunners. There's a bunch of lore you could write there.
Mm.
Because there's some stuff about the Forerunners, sure, but we don't know too much about them. Yeah, sure. They had this whole beef with humanity. Yeah, sure. They kind of are the reason the Flood are a thing. But beyond key points like that, we really don't know much about them.
We don't
Too
know
much.
what their worlds were like. We don't know what their day to day was like. We don't have any other kind of detail besides just the fundamentals that you get.
Right,
So
so you could work with that. Like, that's easy to work with. There's a very easy way to tell it. Hell, they're kind of expanding upon that kind of thing in the new games, where it's played off that the Forerunners might have had another civilization they've had beef with, but again, different story, different video.
hmm.
But again, it's reasons like that where you could work with that. But when you take something like a beloved character and rewrite their story entirely for the sake of creating, I don't know, again, the TV series,
see,
you start to wonder, have you lost the plot effectively?
I'll actually bring in this one. So if you're aware, the Scooby Doo series that came out
We're
not
gonna
too
bring up
long ago.
Velma.
Yeah, well, not just Velma.
You're
No,
gonna
no,
bring
no.
that
Here's the thing. Not just Velma. Every single
up.
character. They even removed Scooby Doo himself, the literal
Really?
namesake of the series. There was no
I've heard of
dog in
Velma.
that TV show. There was no
I've
no
heard of
Scooby
Velma.
Doo.
I've heard of Velma. I've seen the like retrospective Saber Spark did on stuff like that, but I've
Yeah.
not seen it.
No, but that's the thing. There is no Scooby Doo in the Scooby Doo, and sure, it's called Velma, but the entire show has this apparent main character who's a bit of a dick to almost anyone and everyone half the time. Like, is being a little self-centered and is kind of being like arrogant towards the very things that they're telling other people they shouldn't be doing. Like, the entire show is just a slap in the face to every single Scooby Doo character. And it just makes you wonder, okay, well, what was the purpose of this? Because, like,
And shock
you're,
value, like,
yeah, you're just kind of shitting on every single character that you're trying to go and make a series off of here. So it's like, what was the purpose?
hell, like even when you go into tie-ins as well, like even when you just want to go into like media as well, just in general, like we could have first had this conversation well back when the new trilogy of Star Wars movies came out. Hell, this was the whole discussion around the trilogies for the new trilogy created by Disney when it first came out, and arguably still bloody is, of like, what's the point of these stories? Like, whether you think they're recycled from the previous series when it comes to the plot or not, one thing is certain: they basically take a dump on so much of Star Wars canon to the point where you sit there and go, okay, regardless of what I think about how the story is structured narratively, you're not even following the narrative to the point where it just seems disrespectful. Like,
Yep.
you sit there and
It's
wonder, what are
it,
you telling at this point?
an entire slap in the face to the original content and everything.
And honestly, I can see why they do this. I don't agree with it. Let me make one thing very clear. I don't agree with any of that kind of decision making, but I can see why they do it, and it's simply this. They do it for the sake of ease of writing. Because here's the thing. This is actually, again, going back to Star Wars, why they threw out all the old canon that came with the Star Wars license when Disney bought it up. Because for those who don't know, Star Wars is like Tolkien. And there is so many bits and bobs of the lore to dig through that you'd be sifting through pages and pages of the Holy Bible before you'd even be able to talk about Star Wars with a respectable context.
Hmm.
But when you're a story writer trying to make movies, that can be a pain in the dick, to be
Yes.
very blunt with you.
There
So
there
Disney's
there are some franchises that are just they have so much information, and if you're not keeping track of it all, you can end up rewriting entire swaths of the story.
yeah, that's a pain in the tail for those who are writing movies and stuff like that. So it was just
Yeah.
easier for them to toss it out and bring back what they wanted. Yeah, sure. But again, you have to be very careful with what you toss out and what you bring back because remember, as I've mentioned previously with the people who are very big fans of Tolkien's work and the Lord of the Rings work, which is his work, if you are very disrespectful or if you say the wrong thing in the lore and you basically rewrite history in the books or rewrite the you're effectively it's like rewriting the Bible. You're sitting there and you are basically slapping the people who like this stuff in the face when you are rewriting. If you are not careful, it can go over very badly, and that's kind of the whole issue we see here. But anyways,
Hmm.
back to movie tie-in games. Side tangent over. But again, it's an interesting point to see when it comes to like movie tie-in games. And actually, we can tie this into the movie tie-in games topic in a way, and maybe in a way that's I personally doubt it, but maybe that's one of the reasons why you don't see too much of that anymore in the tie-in space, so to say. And like I said, it's arguably not even appropriate to refer to things like that as tie-ins anymore because of how devoid they are of the actual thing. They take place in the world, they take place in there, and if they're created by someone or someones who either are involved in the actual main stuff or have a deep respect of it, then yeah, sure, it's close enough or at very least very or on point with the original stuff that it makes sense, but it's not the actual original stuff itself. Like again, circling all the way back to where this first topic came in my mind, the Avatar game. It takes place around the same time as the Avatar movie, the new one anyway. Like I think it takes place not in parallel, but around the same time. Maybe a few years difference, maybe less, but around the same time. Maybe even with the same problems. But it's on a whole other continent of Pandora where the game is based around. And yeah, individuals like Jake Sully and stuff like that, and the main, I think, villain of the new movies, if I'm guessing correctly, because I still haven't seen it. I have it, but I haven't seen it yet. If my guessing is correct, they get brought up in the game and get name dropped here, there, and everywhere, but we never see them. Not once, as far as I know. So, you know, maybe that's the reason. It's just safer in a way to make games that are in the same universe, but are not, directly associated with the actual plot of the movie or the film, because otherwise they have to sift through all the stuff and be like, oh shit, can't do that because that's a plot hole, can't do that because that's a narrative problem, da 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 da.
Right.
Maybe that's kind of it, but honestly, I doubt it. But you never know. As for why they don't put the game in front of anything anymore, I just think they trust people enough to know what the heck's a game and what the heck's a movie. So you're not sticking the Series X disc in your Blu-ray player going, why can't I see Avatar 2? But
Where
anyways,
is it?
honestly, like I swear to God, that's literally what that's my headcanon now. They put the game in front of all the old movie tie-in games because they didn't think people would be able to distinguish between the game and the movie. But anyway.
Hmm.
And again, maybe that's why the new Indiana Jones game has nothing to do with the new movie. It's a completely different story for Indiana. I think it's actually when he's also much younger too. I don't know, maybe. I
Who
haven't
knows?
played it yet, not out yet, but yeah. So that's the movie tie-in topic I wanted to go on about. And unless Justin has any final thoughts on the topic or has some grand explanation he wants to
Not
dive into himself.
not particularly. I mean, like I went and said, it really just comes down to, like you went and said earlier with the point of like you've got a lot of people making adaptations, storyboarders, writers who sometimes will throw things to the wayside when going and making their own version of it. And sometimes you do have to sacrifice that, especially if you're having a time restraint, such as a movie. Because in a movie, a lot of the times you're either an hour or an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours at the most. But even then, it's typically an hour to an hour and a half of length
Mhm.
of screen time. So you do have to condense a lot of things down.
So you either have to add things in or take things out.
Right. So there are some cases where you're better off going and pretty much making multiple movies, but the question is, okay, well, would multiple movies actually even be profitable and work? That's the problem with it on that front. But the thing is you kind of end up sacrificing so much at times that you just outright lose the entire whole original purpose of that story in the first place. Like, you lose certain aspects that were in the books to the point where, okay, well, now you've got the people watching the movie going and wondering, okay, well, what's the point of this now? Because you're kind of just missing this X plot point here. So,
That
yeah.
that is an interesting point to bring up. Just on an ending note, it is interesting because I remember watching the history behind Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and realizing it's actually based on a book that only had him as a character, not as the actual main centerpiece by and large.
Mm.
And I remember when it actually said a trend, weirdly enough, among authors is that when they get their movies adapted into film, because this has happened long before Harry Potter or the Hunger Games came
All
out.
right. Oh,
Like,
yeah.
this trend of adapting movies into games, or movies into just other media, or books, I mean, into other media, generally speaking, authors, unless they're directly involved with it, like for example Harry Potter, like J.K. Rowling was literally on set, I think, constantly, just like being as a producer and stuff like that, to oversee the creation. Generally speaking, the authors hate it. Like the movie adaptations of their books.
Yep.
The guy who created Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which was originally named, hated the Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the original one, and died before he could see the second one, so I'm just going to say he probably hated the second one. Another famous story is that the man who made The Shining, I can't remember his name, he also famously also hated The Shining movie when it came out. So, you know, it's this kind of trend among authors, and you kind of see that with the fan base too. Like, if you have only one source and it gets adapted differently, well, there might be a point where you're just like, I don't like this.
Yep.
Oddly enough, fans often wind up loving the movies despite the authors hating them. So, matter of fact.
It's
But anyways,
it's interesting at times. I mean, sometimes it's founded because in a way it goes and simplifies certain things for people, allowing for a broader audience. But at sometimes it loses core fundamental things that made it what it was.
yeah, like going back to the Willy Wonka one, right?
Yeah.
The author called the first movie too sappy, right? Yet everyone loved the first movie, not intentionally because of how it came out, but in the end, everyone ended up loving it, as well as that sappy point. So you kind of wonder if, like, the author hates the movie because the people who are watching it, both the books and the movie and stuff like that, because the people who made the movie also loved the book, they're taking different things away from it than the author intended. So maybe they know the book better than the author. Ain't that funny?
Who
But
knows?
that's a whole other topic for another video. But yeah, that's tie-ins, I suppose. Not just game tie-ins, which is what I was originally hoping to do this all, but tie-ins in general, I guess.
I mean, that's the big thing when it comes to a topic like this is it's all kind of interconnected with the whole aspect of a story writer and like what they've chosen to continue the writing of and what they haven't.
Right. I always figured this was going to be a long video anyway, but we'll see. We'll see when it comes out how long this is.
It's
So
pretty
we'll let
long.
you all go.
It's pretty long already, so we'll just cut it off here.
So we'll cut it off here. Have a good night, everyone. Hope you enjoyed my video expose on tie-in games and stuff like that. Tie-ins in general. And happy Valentine's Day, and have a good night.